Time now for Talking Points with Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA. Charlie, the news is ablaze with the love of democratic socialism. Can you explain to us, first of all, where this is coming from with outstanding economic performance, with low unemployment? People can't find enough employees for their work. Why is there this resurgence now in a left-wing fascination with socialism?
Well, look, it's very easy to be generous with other people's money. What I find to be most stunning about the people that are socialists, it's that they say they hate America, they say they hate the idea of America. What's so interesting about our country is that we're the only country in the history of the world where even those who hate it refuse to leave. They want to bring the very ideas that our grandparents fought and died against. Mind you, we fought and won the Cold War. We fought against communism all across the world. Now they want to bring those very ideas here to the homeland, which is it's so wrong. It is so morally misguided. Socialism is, as Winston Churchill said, it's the creed of the envy. It's the doctrine of the ignorant, something like that, where essentially it's about taking other people's things, about taking other ideas. It's about always growing government to benefit, not benefit other people, but to benefit the elites. And mind you, if you look at Venezuela, which is a very good example, the left loved talking about Venezuela for years. Oh, Venezuela is a great example of democratic socialism. Venezuela's, they care about other people, all this nonsense. And now Venezuela is in flames. Inflation in Venezuela will hit 1,000,000% this year, 1,000,000%. And it's a misunderstanding of the incentive structure, misunderstanding of the price system, misunderstanding of economics in general. And this whole new conversation has really been brought to the forefront because of Ocasio-Cortez's win in New York. And I like to say the Republican Party is the party of Abraham Lincoln. The Democrat Party has become the party of Karl Marx. That is a fight that I'm willing to embrace. But it's kind of horrifying if they win.
Why do you think it's so prevalent that when socialism fails, you mentioned that people come to our country, oftentimes illegally from foreign countries, they're running away in places like Mexico, they're running away from socialist governments, and yet when they get here, at least initially they tend to vote for socialist policies. And it's even worse than that. You have native-born Americans, Californians, for instance, who are fleeing the tax burden and the social welfare system of California, moving to places like Texas and Idaho and Arizona, and then voting for socialist candidates in those states as well. Why is it so impossible for socialists, both people who grew up with socialism and people who fetishize it, to learn from their mistakes?
Well, look, the issue is that the elites that push socialism actually benefit tremendously from it. It's the very people that are suffering underneath it that are the ones that are the worst part of the equation. And so, look, it's very easy to sell socialism. Utopianism is a very attractive, sexy idea to a populace that is hurting and that is suffering. Where I'll agree with the socialists. They say, well, the system is rigged for the wealthy, the few, and the well-connected. Okay, well, I'll generally agree with that. But then why would we want to make the system bigger and stronger? Their solution is to make the very government that they believe is rigged against them to have more power, to have more jurisdiction, to have more bureaucrats, and to have more capacity to go after the little guy like us. The richest counties in America are all surrounding Washington, D.C. This is 8 out of 10 of the wealthiest counties in America are around Washington, D.C. To look at wealth, looking at a county structure is actually the best way to see how wealth concentrates. Geographically, when you have 80% of the wealthiest counties in America within a 50-mile radius of Washington, what does that tell you? It tells you that we have been rigging the game against the little guy by making government too big. Therefore, the logical answer in no way could possibly be to make that very same government bigger, more powerful, and have more control over our life.
You mentioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and we now know of her background that she was a very privileged young woman growing up. She was hardly Alexi from the block. We now know that for the second consecutive year, Bernie Sanders, socialist fanboy, he has made more than $1 million in personal earnings, let alone what his wife brings in. And we have Kathy Griffin, the big mouth comedian, anti-Trump supporter of socialism, who just built a wall around her own property to protect her from her Republican neighbor. And so the idea here that the very wealthiest among us, the most privileged among us, they see socialism as a solution. It really is more about the idea that they're going to be in the elite that run this organization. They're going to be the oligarchy, right? They're going to be the small minority that gets to tell the rest of us what to do.
That's right. And you hit it so perfectly, is that what socialism does is it is it creates this small elite, and then the masses underneath have to live in total, absolute, permanent, and perpetual misery, while the elites say, oh, don't worry, utopianism is right around the corner. Oh, well, the reason we haven't achieved utopianism is because of racism and xenophobia and sexism. You see this in California, where they're continually blaming conservatives and capitalists. There's none left. Like, you have nothing left to blame. Like, you control everything in California, from the supermajority in the state legislature to the governor, the attorney general, to the U.S. senators, to the congressmen. They control everything in California. You have nothing left to blame, except California has become a total wasteland and hellhole. You see it in Venezuela. But it's also the soft implementation of socialism that people have to resist, whether it be France, whether it be Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece. These are countries that we should reject wholeheartedly, with income tax rates upward of 70 to 80%, with a work ethic that is completely and totally deteriorated, with the death of nationalism, the death of national identity, which is a very, very scary thing happening in Europe. And so I reject all forms of socialism. But people say, and if you give me a minute, I want to touch on this. People say, oh, well, what about the Nordic countries? What about Sweden and Norway and Finland and Denmark? Well, my definition of socialism, first and foremost, is how much economic freedom do you allow? Well, by the World Economic Freedom Index, by every metric, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland have a higher ranking on the World Economic Freedom Index than the United States of America. So for that, I applaud them. Less regulation, lower taxes, that's great. Where do they go wrong? Well, they have very high personal income taxes on the wealthy. That's not good. 70% confiscatory tax, not even close to being good. But here's the other thing. They only have a population of 8 million people that is very homogenous. Low rates of immigration. They're changing that for the worse. But they also don't have to pay for a military. The United States of America pays for the military of the entire European continent. We subsidize European socialism through our benevolent, and I would say kind of reckless, not reckless, but mistaken national security, where we build bases all across Europe, and we are able to subsidize European socialism.
I think one of the most remarkable examples of this we have in the world today is Barack Obama, the socialist community activist or organizer, right, who now is collecting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in speaking fees in the economically devastated continent of Africa. He goes to Africa without any shame, talking to nations and people who have been ruined by quasi-dictatorial socialist regimes, raking all kinds of money that could go to feed tens of thousands of people for one single speech, and lecturing the West about its policies with regards to freedom and the greater good of all. It is really staggering when you think about how popular a figure someone like Barack Obama is, and he is building his mansion in Chicago has a wall on it to keep keep people out. Yep,
and armed guards.
That's right. And the library he's thinking of building, the presidential library he's trying to push on the people of Chicago, is going to be so expensive. It's going to use eminent domain to kick wealthy landowners off of their land so he can create this palace to himself. Local liberals in Chicago are even protesting this, and yet the Obama machine rolls along. Here's a question for you. Do you think the average American citizen, given how badly educated the public schools are training kids, our kids know nothing about economics. Do you think the average American understands enough about the economy to recognize the difference between free markets and socialism?
They don't, and this is why I love the work that you're doing, to actually educate people on the fundamentals and the basics, and you totally get it. You get the importance of it, you get the depth, you have the knowledge of the history. And look, it's not that young people are not being taught history. They're being taught the wrong history, which is even worse when you think about it. I mean, they're being taught that America was founded on racism and homophobia and xenophobia and colonialism. This is all nonsense. They're being taught that somehow the Republican and Democrat party switched in the 1960s. There's zero evidence to suggest that whatsoever. In fact, Democrats have always been about controlling people. They just control them differently today than they did back in the 1960s or in the 1920s. And so look, here's the bottom line, is that the work you're doing is so important because we need to educate the American populace on the fundamentals of civics, the Constitution, history, economics, because once people have that basic line of information, then they can make the most informed decision. But only someone who doesn't understand history could possibly be a Marxist, and that's why you're seeing the rise of socialism in America.
Yeah, we see that with our school, FreedomProject Academy. We start introducing sound economic ideas to kids as young as elementary school because we recognize as they get older, they begin to see how economics and history go hand in hand, which is something the public schools don't teach.
That's exactly right. And so, look, if you understand economics, you have to understand history. If you understand history, you have to understand economics. Like, why did the Great Depression happen? Well, it didn't happen because of rich, wealthy people that were over speculating. It happened because of central bank policy and the Smoot-Hawley tariff and stuff like that. That people don't really, they don't teach in our schools. They say, oh, it's always the capitalist's fault. Well, that's not true. So it's so important, the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. And before I let you go, I got to ask you, in the news today, Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez promoting a Medicare for All program that would cost $32.6 trillion over the next 10 years. $1 trillion.
It's unbelievable. I mean, so look, at least there's a price tag on it. And Bernie Sanders actually bragging about it. He's like, oh, it's not that much money. What are you kidding me? I mean, so look, but no matter what the government touches, it ruins. No matter what the left destroys, everything it touches. Never forget that. And if you think healthcare is horrible now and you think it's expensive now, just wait until it's free and wait until government is mandating it. And so, look, we need to get to free market economics and healthcare, free market principles, which would bring down cost of healthcare, bring up the quality, and expand the accessibility. Bernie Sanders wants to bring another social welfare program that would further bankrupt this country and worsen the quality of healthcare. We need to resist it at every turn.
Yeah, and I want to point out to the viewers that notice what the progressive left is doing. They're not proposing single-payer healthcare because most Americans associate that with socialism. So what are they arguing? Let's take an existing entitlement, Medicare, which probably should never have been approved anyway. Let's take an existing entitlement, Medicare, and turn it into single-payer socialist nationalist healthcare without really telling people that's what we're doing.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so Medicare's bankrupt. It's ripe with fraud. It's actually a bad deal for a lot of people, but that's besides the point. But they're just trying to further expand it, and they're good at branding, to give them give them credit for that. But we have to resist that and reject it.
Seems like we're beginning to see some Democrats beginning to push back a little bit against Cortez and that particularly viral sort of socialism, the populist socialism. Do you think more of that will happen before the elections in 2018?
I sure hope so. But at the same time, the Democrats have always been some blend of pseudo-Marxism and socialism. Now they're just fully embracing it. Politically, we have a great opportunity now to say, see, we told you, this is the party of Marx. And so, look, I'm very upset. I'm not upset. I'm very worried that the more power that they get, the more harm they're going to do to this country. That's why it's incumbent on us to defeat them at the ballot box this November.
Charlie, great talking to you. We will see you again next week.
You too. Thanks so much.